Signify by beeping twice.
If everything's ready here on the dark side of the moon, play the 5 tones.
The UFO subject, as we know it, came to the public's attention on June 24th, 1947, when private pilot Kenneth Arnold, flying over the Cascade Mountains in the USA, witnessed a formation of objects that he could not identify. Speaking later to a journalist regarding the encounter, Arnold was asked how the formation of objects moved through the air, and his response was, like a skipping saucer across a pond. From that moment on, the coined phrase flying saucer was born. This is what the author writes in his book Introduction UFOs, a young person's guide. Philip Mantle, the former director of investigations for the British UFO Research Association and the MUFON Representative for England, has selected several UFO cases and the histories from the 1940s onwards and placed them underneath a magnifying glass for you to explore. But these documentations written in his book are not meant to be in-depth, but rather to illustrate the case in as brief a way as possible, without missing the most notable points. I am your host, Maria Anna van Driel, and you are listening to The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. And this week I'm speaking with the founder of Flying Disc Press, Philip Mantle, who is a long-standing UFO researcher and author from the West York, UK, about why are we still in the dark when it comes to extraterrestrial life visiting our planet, and which of their advanced technologies has already applied to earthly technologies. Philip, welcome to the show of The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. Well, first of all, a happy new year, and I surely hope that 2021 is going to be an amazing year for you and your research to the phenomena of UFOs.
Well, thank you, Maria, and a happy new year to you. Let's hope it's a better new year for everyone compared to last year, shall we?
Yeah, last year was a tremendous fearful year with 2 lockdowns in Corona. I hope we do not have to counter another one. Philip, as I just shared in your intro, you were the former director of investigations for the British UFO Research Association and the MUFON Representative for England. What made you step aside the farming?
It was a lot of work involved, Maria. I mean, when I was before as director of investigations in the mid 1990s, I mean, things were very busy indeed. I also did other roles as well. I was before as press officer, and I was their conference organizer. So I wasn't just doing any one thing. And of course, I think at that time I had about 100 investigators registered for Bufora all over the UK. To become an investigator, you had to complete a training course. So I had to administer the training course as well. So it just got to the stage where, you know, something had to give, something had to go. And, you know, I stood aside and stood down from Bufora, although I am an honorary life member, so I can't escape, so to speak, Maria. And I still continue to support the association, but I also had a young family that was growing up that also needed my attention. I had to stand aside in that respect. There was just too much work. We were too busy. and my colleague that took over from me is a lady by the name of Gloria Dixon, and Gloria didn't have the same commitments as I did, and she still does the job today, and an excellent job she's done. So it just took up an awful lot of time, Maria, and you know, and I did it for a number of years. I thoroughly enjoyed it, met a lot of friends, organised some great conferences for Bufora, and handled a whole raft of press inquiries from around the world, which has, you know, put me in good stead for today. And you know, the same with MUFON. You know, I used to get things to investigate that were reported to MUFON, and it just became too busy. I enjoyed it a great deal, Maria. It was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that when you meet so many different kind of people with almost a similar story, a little bit different from each other, but a similar story about UFOs and any unexplained phenomena in the sky. So, but you are saying that you were raising a young family. How is your family looking at, well, my husband or my dad is researching UFOs and the things that you see in science fiction movies?
Yeah, I mean, my two daughters are grown up now, and they're proud of their dad. They didn't know quite what to make of it when they were little, of course. But I still have a file here, Maria, of pictures that my children drew. Sometimes when I was working and their mum was busy, I'd get the paper out and the pencils, and they would draw UFOs and aliens for me. And I still have a whole folder full of them. So, but they're proud of their dad now, and certainly my youngest girl has got copies of all my books and things of that nature. But yeah, they took an interest, but they're not involved in any way. Now, my stepson Andrew, he's the same. He's always interested in what's happening and what we're doing. So I had to stand aside and make some time for my children and my proper job that paid the bills. But like I said, Maria, we certainly had a lot of fun, especially at the conferences that I organised, some of which were the biggest conferences you ever seen in Britain, and with speakers there from around the world. And it was great fun, and I made a lot of friends.
I can imagine that your children have grown into the whole story about alien civilizations and advanced technologies and etc. But what was it that made you step into the research of UFOs? Because I can imagine it is not like that you wake up one morning and say, okay, let's research the unexplained phenomena in the sky people call UFOs. Yeah. Yeah. So what influenced you to step?
Well, I was always interested, Maria, even as a youngster. I was always interested in all things paranormal. Quite literally, as far as I can remember, things of the paranormal, ghosts, paranormal activity, you name it, fascinated me. And my best friend's grandmother used to live just over the opposite side of the street from where we lived. And she used to attend a spiritualist church. So I went there with her a few times, and I found that fascinating. And then I read, I used to be interested in astronomy as well, and I read one book. I've never been able to remember what it was called, but it had one chapter in it on UFOs. And that got me interested. So managed to get another book from the library, and that got me even more interested. And of course, when I finished high school, I did a variety of different jobs to start with. And of course, in 1978, the Spielberg movie Close Encounters came out. And shortly after that year, in late 1978, over the Christmas and into 1979, I worked for a short period of time in what was then West Germany. And of course, I couldn't speak the language. So I asked my mum to send me some books to read. So she sent me a parcel of books, all of which were on UFOs. So by the time I returned from West Germany, the interest had gathered momentum, if you like. And my aunt, who lived round the corner from us, she brought me a local newspaper one day, and in there was an advertisement. I live in the county of Yorkshire. I'm in the west of the county. And there was an advertisement for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society coming up that Sunday in the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire. So that Sunday, I got the bus into Leeds, found the location where this meeting was taking place, and in I went. And there was, I don't know, 20, 30 people there. And the Yorkshire UFO Society was formed by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. And they put on a presentation that day, Maria, and they'd obviously been involved for a few years at that point. And that was me hooked. I felt this is where I belong. I felt at home. They also had a book stand selling more books, which I was thrilled to see. And I bought, a nice selection of books, and I joined. I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society. And as we progressed into the 1980s, Maria, there were parts of North Yorkshire, in an area known as the Yorkshire Dales National Park, that had a lot of UFO sightings. And, those sightings found their way to us. So I kind of joined the society at the right time because I wanted to know more. I was rather naive, Maria, I must admit. I thought I'd read some more books. I'll maybe speak to a few people and write a few letters, and I'll get all the answers I'm looking for. But of course, that was over 40 years ago, and I'm still looking for a lot of those answers now. I was always the type of person, Maria, that wanted to know and find things out for themselves. Hence, my movement forward into actual UFO investigation and research. And I was with the Yorkshire UFO Society for many years. And I learned a lot as a result, and that's how it all began.
There are still many questions around UFOs and all the other phenomena in the sky unexplained are still open. But for our listeners, can you explain what is being discussed at a meeting as such? What is being shown, presented?
This was a local UFO group. And when I first attended, it was talking about local UFO sightings in and around the Yorkshire area. And Graham and Mark also showed some photographs of some strange lights that had been seen and photographed in the area. And it showed us the locations and what the society's aims and objectives were. Like I said, we were very fortunate that no sooner had the society been formed that areas in and around us seemed to have a lot of UFO sightings. So we had a continuous supply of new information. So we would hold the meetings on a monthly basis. And of course, we would discuss the latest sightings. We also started to publish our own small newsletter. And in there, we would talk about the sightings and things of that nature. And we'd also take volunteers out into the Yorkshire Dales to these areas on an evening and do what we call a sky watch. So we try and confront the phenomena, but we'd also learn them about some of the things they could see in the night sky, such as the stars and planets and so on, that were often mistaken for UFOs. So, it did a variety of things. And, the society grew, got more members. We went from printing a small newsletter to making our own magazine. And we began to give public lectures. We then began to put on our own conferences, which were a larger event. So we'd have speakers from around the UK and also from overseas. For example, the first overseas speaker any of the conferences we organised was a gentleman from Norway. He was part of UFO Norway at the time. His name was Odd Gunnar Road. This was the mid-1980s, and I am still friends with him to this very day.
During those meetings, is that also a topic being discussed, like where the most phenomena where the most UFO phenomena are being, well, reported, being seen? Because it seems that UFOs are mostly seen or in and around a mountain-like area. Or am I incorrect?
Well, UFOs from time to time, appear in abundance in a variety of areas. For example, what you were saying there, one of the reasons we met my colleague from UFO Norway, Odd Gunnar, is because there was an area in Norway called Hessdalen. It's in central Norway. Hessdalen is surrounded by 3 mountains, and they had an awful lot of sightings down below the horizon, down in the valleys in Hessdalen. So they set up camp there, they filmed, they took pictures of these lights, and now there is a full scientific laboratory that monitors the area 24 hours a day. But yeah, and that's in Hessdalen in Norway.
Is that very close to that hydroelectric power plant in Vermont? That's also in Norway.
No, not that I'm aware of. This is up in the mountains out of the way. But we had an awful lot of sightings here, Maria. And of course, we don't have any mountains. They were in the hills and what we call the dales, which are just hills basically. There's no mountains, and they were seen a lot of observations made throughout the 1980s, and then it seemed to tail off for whatever reason.
Just a question: did you have your own experience with an encounter of UFO encounter or alien encounter, or maybe even an abduction?
I've not been abducted, no. What I have seen was in these areas in the Yorkshire Dales, as I've mentioned, there was one particular area just outside the market town of Skipton, above a little village called Carlton, and it had a moor, Carlton Moor, and this was just heather. There was no livestock on it. It was just for grouse shooting and that kind of thing. And a colleague by the name of Graham, who founded the Yorkshire UFO Society, he called me on the phone and said, "Do you fancy going up onto the moors for an hour?" So he came and picked me up. I didn't drive at that point. We parked in a place on Carlton Moor that we knew, been there many times. And when you were on the moors there at night, Maria, there's nothing. There are no lights, there are no dwellings, no buildings, nothing. Just blackness and a clear sky. We've been there about half an hour, 45 minutes, and in the distance, just above the moor, we could see this little white light. And we knew there was nothing there that could cause it. So Graham and I jumped in the car. Graham was driving. He used to drive like a madman anyway, Maria. So he's driving fast across complete blackness. And I'm looking out of the passenger window. And at one point, I could see right down the valley. There was a little valley there, and I could see right down it. And hanging in the sky was a cartwheel of coloured lights. If you think about the London Eye, a big Ferris wheel of lights just hanging in the sky. And then we were gone. We'd gone past it. I told Graham, and all he did was curse because he hadn't seen it himself. We drove. The road we went on takes you all around the moor, brings you all the way back to the beginning where we were. We didn't see anything else, and that was that. We saw that on Carlton Moor. What it was, Maria, I have no idea. There is nothing there that can explain it. There's no buildings, there's no factories. It wasn't an aeroplane or anything like that. It's just a huge circular mass of coloured lights hanging in the sky.
This almost sounds like the story, the abduction story of Barney and Betty Hill from the mid-60s. They also saw something beside them and following them, but you didn't encounter this following, but they did. It's almost like that.
Well, no, we didn't encounter any following. If anything, we were in pursuit of whatever this thing was.
It was the other way around.
Yeah, and we know the area very well. We've been there both in the daylight and many times at night, and this kind of fitted in with other sightings that were made by people in the area. It's not. It's very sparsely populated, even today. What it was, Maria, I couldn't honestly say, and I'm just sad that Graham didn't see it at the same time. But he had to concentrate on his driving because it was pitch darkness. There's no street lights or anything there. Total darkness. And
Could it be that in the darkness, in the night, that you have, well, missed a couple of clouds hanging there, and that car lights have been reflected on, well, a cloud containing a little bit more water than normal clouds, or the reflection of the lights of a helicopter, for instance, that you didn't saw because it was behind you or in a dead angle from you? Could it be a reflection on a cloud, that you think?
well, there was no clouds that night. That's the only problem. It was a beautifully clear night, no low clouds, and nothing to reflect anything off. And why there'd be helicopters in that area at that time of night, there's no reason for it. Plus, we would have heard it anyway. But so there was no clouds for lights to reflect off. It was a beautifully clear night. That was the reason that Graham decided to go, because it was going to be a clear night. We'd get a good view of everything around us. And, you know, I'd love to give an explanation for it. I really would, but I just don't have one.
Have you made pictures or video from that?
No, we were in the car driving like mad because we thought, well, we didn't expect to see it there. I was just looking out of the car window when I could see it down the valley. And it took us by surprise, and we went past it, and that was it. When we stopped, it had gone. So it was only a fleeting glimpse.
It's probably because I'm a journalist. And the first thing when I see something that is, well, out of the ordinary, the first thing that I think about is, where's my photo camera? Where's my film camera? I need something to record this right now.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I had a camera in the car, and we had binoculars as well. But we were certainly, it came upon us unexpectedly. And but we do have photographs from that very same location made by a police officer of two strange lights. And it was low cloud that night, because you can see the lights reflecting off the cloud. And they moved in front of him very closely, and he took a photograph of it. And he was so disappointed in the quality of his picture. He went and invested in a lot of money in buying a much better camera with high-speed film, just in case he saw them again. And of course he did. 3 years later, in a slightly different location, he was on his way to a meeting with his wife, and they saw this thing, and they said it looked like a spinning top. And his wife, he stopped the car, he gave his wife the binoculars. He grabbed his camera, and she said it looked like it was covered in little tiny red lights that all glowed at the same time. So he wedged his elbows on the roof of his car and took 2 photographs, and then he tried to, because this is at night, it's dark, he tried to make sure that it was perfectly still, and he took another one, and the 3rd photograph turned out to be the best of the lot. There was very little camera shake and so on. And we had those photographs analysed by a computer, and they said that whatever this thing was, it was self-illuminating, and it was giving off some kind of vapour or gas. And the photographs remained unidentified.
That is a big question mark. Now, I was thinking, when I was listening to you, UFO and alien life forms, we think of them as being advanced in life, but also in technology. We have, for instance, our helicopters. These helicopters, for instance, have a tremendous good night vision. Our helicopters do not need lights to turn on to fly in the air, because and we have radar, etc. So if these alien civilizations are entering our atmosphere, and they are that advanced, don't you think that they have something that is better than our night vision, that is better than our radar systems, and that they do not have to, turn on their headlights, if I may call them like so? So why do these phenomena have all these creepy unexplained lights?
That's a good question. The answer is we don't know. We really don't know. I've been asked that question several times, Maria. You know, why do UFOs have lights on them?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. And of course, if we go back to the Steven Spielberg science fiction film Close Encounters, lights were used as a communications device.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I got your point. Yes, but go on.
But in reality, we don't even know if UFOs are from an alien race. That is one of many theories. But for sake of argument, if they are, then you know their technology is beyond us. So trying to understand it may well be impossible for us, because you would expect that if a civilization from another star system managed to travel here and find us, they would be much further advanced than we are technologically wise, and so the likelihood is that we wouldn't be able to understand it in the first place. So trying to figure out what we're looking at may be extremely difficult, if not impossible. But why UFOs have lights on them, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea.
Probably, like you say, it's an attempt to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, in Close Encounters, they used sound as a communication as well. They had the 5 tones, which...
What was it again? No, what was it again?
You weren't far
I
off.
had that in your intro. I found that so, if I did, really intriguing sound, and there's a dude, and you had that hand signature with it, and there was, yeah,
the hand signals for deaf people, of course. So so they were the idea was they were trying to teach us a rudimentary way of communicating, and eventually the computers took over and they were talking to each other, and the music was going and the lights were flashing. But that's science fiction. In reality, we have no idea. You've only got to think about creatures on our own planet, Maria, and some of the creatures on our own planet communicate with each other in the most bizarre ways at times. They really do. So there's nothing to think that another species from an alien race might have another bizarre way of communicating that is totally, alien to us.
Like that woman, I believe she was a biologist, but I'm not quite sure, and I forgot her name, I'm sorry. But she has lived with gorillas for a couple of years, and we are an alien to that gorilla, and we are trying by reflecting what they are doing, trying to communicate. So that is probably maybe a plausible idea for why UFOs have these lights, and they are only trying to, well, reflect what we are doing with our car lights, for instance. Maybe they think that, well, that is our way of communication in the dark.
Well, we do know that on occasion that UFOs have reacted to lights. For example, again, that same area I was telling you about in the Yorkshire Dales, same police officer. Sometimes the police vehicles would park their cars on the hilltops because they got a better radio reception there. So this police officer is no longer with us now. He was called Tony Dodd. With a colleague, he's parked on the top of the moors, on duty in the police car, when this UFO came over them. It had 3 lights on its underside, passed right over them. So what they did, as it went by them, they turned on the police car blue light, and this thing turned around and came back. My colleagues at UFO Norway and UFO Sweden, who set up Project Hestalen, we talked about the Hestalen Valley and the lights there. They set up camp in the valley one winter with radar, with a battery of cameras, also a laser. Now, they got one of the lights coming over the valley, and it was blinking. They fired the laser at it. It changed the rate at which it blinked. It blinked in a different manner, as if reacting to the laser. And those are just a couple of examples. But it's fascinating. It really is. It is fascinating. But we have to remember that here on Earth, The next most intelligent creature to us is the dolphins. And science tells us they have their own rudimentary language. But yet we cannot communicate with them, Maria. We can't speak to them. We can teach them to do tricks. You know, they can jump up and catch a fish. We can't say to them, how are you today? You know, how are you feeling? What do you want to do? What are your friends like? We can't communicate with them. So,
not in a way that we understand.
Well, exactly. But so how are we meant to communicate with something that people believe is from beyond the stars if we can't communicate with a lesser species here on Earth?
I have no idea, except for light, probably sound, telepathic, in images.
Yeah, but it's not straightforward, is it? It's not as simple as you would imagine. So if we are dealing with something that's not of this Earth, it's going to be extremely complex and very, very difficult, if not impossible, to figure out. But we try.
Now, Philip, you mentioned Norway a couple of times, and well, we all know, well, at least many people know, this story about in World War II that there was a transportation of heavy water from a hydroelectrical power plant in Vermont, Norway, to Poland. And the experiments around this top secret scientific technological device, also known as Hitler's bell or Das Wunderwaffe. Do you think that all these events in Norway to Poland to Das Wunderwaffe could be a direct result from a particular UFO crash 10 years before the Roswell incident, and that was in 1937, and that was, if I'm correctly, in Czernica, Germany, what is now Poland, a 10-year earlier UFO crash?
Well, again, you know, the bell, the Nazi bell as it's known, the Glock, it's just a myth, Maria. There is no evidence to support its existence whatsoever. We do know that the Germans did make heavy water in Telemark in Norway, but the power plant was destroyed by the Norwegians. So that prevented the Nazis furthering their ideas to build an atomic bomb.
Do you think that it's an atomic bomb? Because I've been in Poland, where they say that Hitler's bell or Das Wunderwaffe was built. I am planning to go to Norway to that hydroelectrical power plant, which is now a museum, I believe. Do you think that it is was an atomic bomb? Because I was in Poland and I saw some.
No, there was no atomic bomb. Had there been an atomic bomb, we would have known about it because the Nazis would have used it. The heroes of Telemark, as they are known, they thwarted the Nazis' plans to build an atomic bomb by blowing up the heavy water plant. And I think all of us in the West should be grateful that they did. And but the myth of the wonder weapon was just the ramblings of a madman in his last throes of fighting the war, when for quite some time, Hitler and his generals had known the war was lost, but they carried on regardless. And he was holed up in his bunker in Berlin, mad as a hatter, dependent on drugs, and eventually blew his own brains out, of course. And so it is just a myth that, the Nazis had, documented just about everything, Maria. There is no documents of any wonder weapon or any bell. They tried to hide some of their dastardly deeds at the end of the war, of course, but it was too late. So it would be nice. It would have been nice to think they had built some kind of advanced technology, but the V1 and the V2 rockets were the beginning of the space race. And of course, it was the German scientists that went to the United States under Operation Paperclip, with the head man being Werner von Braun, of course, who eventually put men on the moon. And but there was no wonder weapon. All the German scientists were caught either by the Allies or by the Soviets. and there was no wonder weapon. They had the technology that we knew about, the V1 and the V2, and they even had a jet fighter, believe it or not, but it didn't go into mass production because the war was lost. No,
They had nothing more than a couple of airplanes that was a little bit advanced in that time. Now here's another thing about this, because like I said, I have been in Poland. I have also spoken with a UFO expert, Nick Poe, and we came to that one movie in where those squid, well, alien things are talking with inky circles. And there is a mix-up in the language. They use the word weapon. And for us, that same word weapon meant for us tool. So if you think about das Wunderwaffe, or in English, the wonder weapon is a wonder tool. Now, heavy water has this strange thingy that you can transport neutrinos in, and neutrinos in physics are being considered as, well, a particle and wave that can transport information. So if they have transported a form of neutrinos containing a particular, well, information after photon trapping and splitting of photons, bringing it back together, and, well, bringing it to Poland, where I was, and there is definitely, and I've saw it with my own two eyes, a big building, well, a ruin these days, built for high electricity, really extreme high electricity. So if we combine everything, and I've been into those tunnels, and they have walled it up at a certain point, you cannot go further unless you break it down. So if they have found a way to use neutrinos and photons and transported it in heavy water to Poland and used it as a tool for communication in a sense of time travel, trying to win the war, and in a sense, okay, probably it is an advanced way of thinking, or maybe it was a stressy moment that they are losing the war. But hey, people trying things to, well, win something if they see that they are losing. Do you think that it is possible, that it's not a myth, and that they were not creating a weapon, but just a tool for communication?
There's lots of myths and mysteries about what the Nazis may or may have done. They may what secret powers. They hunted for, religious artifacts. Did they find the Holy Grail? Did they find the lost Ark of the Covenant? Because if you have the Ark of the Covenant, of course, the Israelites carried it in front of them, and it defeated everyone that looked upon it. So there's all these myths, but that's all the armory. There is no substance whatsoever. And, there's myths about the Nazis went to the moon. And there's moon bases, or they had bases at the South Pole. I mean, it's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. They were, a military force with a dictator at its helm, who was an absolute maniac. He was a madman, and massacred millions of people. And that's all we need to know about them. There is no connection to the UFO phenomena. We have to remember that during the war, both the Allies and the Axis pilots reported seeing UFOs. It was Foo Fighters.
Yeah, Foo Fighters.
And they each thought it was the other. The Allies thought these were Nazi secret weapons. The Nazis and the Japanese thought there must be the Allied secret weapons. And of course, at the end of the war, they were neither.
At least it is a nice stuff to have a conversation for, at least 2 evenings.
Well, yeah, it's a great myth, great story, but that's all it is.
Have you ever researched, a case that has a direct connection with Foo Fighters?
No, I haven't. I've read some official documents from our own air crews during the war who reported what we now call Foo Fighters, and they were certainly intrigued by them, as were the Air Ministry at the time, because they didn't know what they were, and more information was tried to be gathered on these mysterious phenomena. And so I've never met a pilot or a navigator or any aircrew that saw them firsthand. Colleagues of mine here in the UK have, but I've not been fortunate enough to do that. But it is a fascinating aspect. You know, we all say that the modern era of UFO started in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold's sighting. Well, it's kind of true. That's when the phrase "flying saucer" came into the public domain.
Yes.
But strange things were seen before then, like the Foo Fighters. In the late 19th century, we had the mystery airships that were observed both here in parts of Europe and in the United States. That was followed by the Foo Fighters. Then in Scandinavia, after the war, they had these mystery rockets that were seen in parts of the country. And they were never found or located. And then, of course, hey presto, Kenneth Arnold with his sighting over the Cascade Mountains in June 1947. So we kind of use that as a starting point, but there were strange phenomena seen before that.
Perhaps these Foo Fighters were a prototype or maybe an advanced type of aircraft from the Adamski craft. But hey, it's still a speculation. But Philip, you do not only research in the field, and you do not only attend these meetings. You are also an author. I believe about four books, or how many have you written?
Well, there's a few more than that, but yes, I am an author. Almost from the very beginning, Maria, I started to write little things. Certainly in our newsletter that we first published. But my first book was published in 1994. I co-authored it with a journalist colleague of mine by the name of Carl Negatus. And it is called Without Consent. And Without Consent deals with accounts of alien abductions and missing time cases here in the UK and the UK only. And just this year, I republished that book. It's a revised edition. It's got additional material in it. And so that's still available now. And it just deals with alien abduction accounts from the UK, and that was the first.
Why do you think that alien civilizations and alien species is abducting people from the Earth's surface?
Well, I'm not going to say that alien species are abducting people. What I will say is that it became clear from our research that we don't know what these experiences are. We can't put a label on them. And, I started my research into this in the early 90s, before the internet, before email or anything like that. And I literally traveled from one end of the country to the other, interviewing people in person. And it became quite clear, Maria, that even the people who have had these experiences didn't really know what had happened to them. So what I did after we published the book, I contacted a number of what we call abductees, and I asked them what they believed happened to them. What was the nature and origin of their experience? And some of them said, yeah, definitely think it's aliens from another planet somewhere. Others, however, thought it was some kind of spiritual experience. Okay. And others just said, Philip, I have no idea. All I can tell you is what happened to me. But I don't know what...
Here's an idea, Philip. I spoke to Professor Sharpless about sleep disorders, among others, sleep paralysis. I also spoke with Jason M. DeBoard, and he is a dream expert. And Jason M. DeBoard was talking about shadows or shadow dream, as well as aliens or alien looking like creatures, that these images we do not understand and thus creating an image that, well, fears us the most, like a shadow or like an alien form. But in reality, it is more like our side from our psyche. And because we have not accepted that, or we have not acknowledged that at this point in time, we translate this in an alien gray with big black eyes, because that is what fears us the most, or a shadow figure, or a clown from the movie It, regardless whatever it is that fears you. So could it be that, well, I'm not saying all, but let's say 70% of the abductions are nothing more than a creepy experience in sleep paralysis, or encountering yourself, but then the dark side of it?
Well, I think when you use the phrase sleep paralysis, the operative word is paralysis. Mm-hmm. It's the thing that stops us falling out of bed every night. We all have sleep paralysis every evening. Yes. We have to understand a lot of these individuals were about their daily tasks, and they weren't paralyzed in any way whatsoever, and they certainly weren't asleep either.
So those belong to the 30%.
So,
okay.
so yes, there may well be some psychological explanations for some of these accounts, but we have to remember as well, Maria, that some of these accounts don't involve just a single person. They involve more than one person, so it will be difficult, if not nigh impossible, for us to have the same psychological phenomena happen to us at the same time.
You're saying that these people experiencing this in broad daylight, they are not paralyzed, they are just occupied with their daily activities, including that other people are, well, being involved in that, like a group experience. Could it be, could it be, that there is an odd, strangely magnetic wave floating through the air, just a natural electromagnetic or magnetic wave, and it's hitting the brains of those people at those moments, because they have the correct frequency or body frequency, that they pick this up and start a form of hallucination. I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
No, I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a colleague of mine by the name of Albert Bodden. Albert lived in London. And Albert was a long-standing UFO researcher and investigator, and he came to the conclusion with an idea that's similar to what you've just suggested. He believes that some people, perhaps a lot of people, to some degree or another, are what he called hypersensitive. In other words, they are allergic to electromagnetic forces.
Allergic. I haven't heard that yet, but that is the next one. Okay, yeah.
And of course, these electromagnetic forces are natural. They are created within the Earth, and they are created artificially as well from things like mobile telephone masts and so on. And Albert was of the opinion that if you encounter one of these electromagnetic forces, and if you are hypersensitive to them, in other words, you're allergic to them, that it can affect your brain and your senses in such a way that you have I'll call it an hallucination, but it goes beyond that. It is a very vivid, a very real experience. And of course, if there are several people there at the same time, then maybe, but so it is a theory that Albert Bodden put out a few years ago. And Albert was so convinced he got the right, he was on the right track, Maria, that he then, took a leave from UFO research. He'd found the answers, so that was him going no further. And it's a fascinating idea. The problem is, to have the same hallucination as someone standing next to you is difficult to comprehend. But it's certainly a theory that's worth considering, shall we say.
Well, a goldfish, this is going to sound very odd for many people, but goldfish, for instance, in a fish tank, can communicate with each other with vibration, just like well, shivering their body, and so they can communicate. So when people are, well, experiencing that moment of being allergic for a magnetic or electromagnetic field that is passing by, maybe their body frequency is going to change and vibrate so that somebody else is picking that up. And also, when in a magnetic field, when you are standing in there, you are feeling dizzy, or perhaps that you are like floating or falling into a deep hole or something. And maybe, just maybe, this missing time people are reporting could have a connection with something natural.
Absolutely. I mean, we tend to think we know all there is to know about the natural world, Maria, but we certainly don't. And the brain is still an area that is, from a scientific point of view, you know, a matter of curiosity. And for example, where does your memory lie? Where does your consciousness lie within your brain? We don't know all the way the brain works.
Yeah.
But as we mentioned earlier, other species on this planet communicate in some very particular and very peculiar ways. So who knows, Maria? But it's, like I said, it's a theory that's certainly worth considering, and not one I would dismiss out of hand. And it is fascinating. And you know, there was a Canadian scientist by the name of Michael Persinger.
Yeah.
Did some work in this, and he built what he called the God helmet. So you got a helmet, put electrodes on it, and you put this helmet on, and he run a mild electric current through you, and it gave you had some peculiar sensations.
I can believe that, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, there has been some experimental work done in that field, but I think there's still a long way to go, but nonetheless fascinating.
These alien civilization, being that advanced as we believe they are, well, there is a high possibility that they are, well, understand how certain natural events are working and behaving. And so they have, well, looked at it, mimicked it, and used it in their form of technology. Which advanced technology, Philip, do you think from them has already applied to earthly technologies?
Well, again, we're assuming that we are being visited by aliens, but we'll take that as an assumption. I certainly don't see any alien technology around. I'll give you an example, Irene. I run my own little company called Flying Disc Press.
Correct, yes.
So I publish books by myself that I've authored, or other authors. And I have one book that I would recommend to anyone. It's called Hypercivilizations, and it is by Dr. Dan Farkas. Dan is from Romania. And now Dan's theory is that, yes, we are being visited by beings from another system. He's not going to argue how they got here or how they traveled here, but we are being visited by. But the thing is, he is of the opinion that this alien species is perhaps hundreds of thousands or even millions of years in advance of us.
Okay.
And they are so advanced that we simply cannot understand them. We cannot comprehend them. And he gives an analogy. For example, you took a computer screen and placed it in an ants colony.
Mm-hmm.
The ants would know it was there. They'd be able to fall all over it. You might even have the army side of the ant colony attack it. But
Yes.
never in a million years will they be able to figure out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the intergalactic ant colony, and a species so far in advance is standing right in front of us, but we simply cannot comprehend what it is, what it's doing, why it's here, and where it came from. And that's Dr. Farkas's hypothesis. He called it hypercivilizations. Would recommend the book to anyone. It's only a small book. It's not a huge, great encyclopedia. And So that would, you know, if you look at it that way, that would mean, you know, when we ask why are the lights on it, well, we've no idea. We cannot understand what is right in front of our noses.
It seems that our brains are not that evolved enough to understand a complex language or a complex communication form or
Yeah,
anything.
we may be top of the food chain here on planet Earth, but on an intergalactic scale, we may have just got out of the starting blocks. You know,
we are indeed on the top of the food chain until there is a mosquito in your bedroom at night. So there is also a question about that. Who is who? Okay. Philip, you say in that book, it is being described that trying to explore this alien civilizations entering our atmosphere, visiting our planet, as far as we may say that it's ours. But even though people, and so many people, have reported unexplained phenomena in the sky, have explained and reported their abductions and missing time and etc., why don't we see these beings?
well, some people claim to have seen them, and you know, a lot of the close encounters and not necessarily abductions. You know, I'll give you an example. We go back to the summer of 1980. I'd only been involved in the subject for about a year, and we had a report in a local town near where I live. The town is called Normanton, and a lady telephoned us, and we went to interview her. She was called Mrs. Westerman. Now, Mrs. Westerman was in her house one day, lovely summer's day. 5 of her children were outside playing a ball game. She was washing the dishes after lunch when one of the children came running in and said, "Mum, there is an aeroplane crashed in the field." She lived in a cul-de-sac. And so at the bottom of her road was some trees and a field and some electricity pylons. There were no more houses. So she came out of the house and she could see across these fields, and she said, "Philip, it looked like a Mexican hat-shaped thing on the ground, but it was like a grey, silver grey colour." So she got the children, they walked down the street, through these trees, they came up the other side, and there was a fence, and there this thing was still on the ground, but now there was 3 humanoid figures, all in white boiler suits. They had a visor over their head, they were waving something across the ground, and the children were trying to get over the fence, but she wouldn't let them. Then these 3 figures walked to the back of this object. It rose up into the air, stopped, and then shot off at an angle and disappeared. There was no missing time, nothing like that. Mrs. Westerman was amazed that she sat down that evening and watched her local news on the television. No mention of it. It's a busy area where she lives. Right next to it is a motorway. None of her neighbours had seen anything. We interviewed her and all the children. We even interviewed one of the children's friends. He'd actually gone home to have his lunch, and then he came back, and he'd missed it all, you know. But he told us about everybody being excited and talking about it and so on. And one of those children I even made contact with again just this year. She's now grown up and got her own family, and she remembers it, you know. And she gave me another statement. So people do see these beings, and Mrs. Westerman was as baffled as anyone.
Probably I didn't hear this correctly, but you were describing 3 figures.
Yes,
standing,
3 humanoid figures. Yes.
Standing alongside this craft.
Yes.
And they were wearing something white.
Yeah, they had boots on. They had mittens, not gloves. They had something in their hand which they were waving across the ground.
Doesn't that sound to you similar to certain people from the World Health Organization?
This is Normanton. There's nothing for the World Health Organization to be doing in Normanton. It was a little mining town very insignificant and still is. I only live a few miles from it today.
Or people from the CDC, for instance. I don't know how it is in the UK, but that sounds like an earthly organization. People who are walking over the ground searching for radioactive material.
I never mentioned radioactive material.
No, but this is what comes to mind with me.
Yeah, there is no radioactive material. This is a little mining town, a very insignificant place. It wasn't a helicopter, because helicopters make an awful lot of noise, and you know, make of it what you will. I can only report. What I can say is, you know, I grew up in a mining town just like this. My father worked down the coal mine all his life. The children were playing the same type of ball game I used to play when I was their age. I know the kind of people. So they were either telling the truth or they were lying. And I could find no reason why they were lying at all.
Truth, okay, fine. They just reported what they have seen.
Yeah.
But if I have to place it into today's terms, I would say that it is something like a human organization. But hey, regardless what those three figures were, what it is indeed. Now, Philip, you just also mentioned that you are the director or the manager of Flying Disc Press.
Yes.
What is the goal of Flying Disc Press?
Well, how it all started, Maria, in the past, I've also been a magazine editor.
Okay.
And as you know, I've worked with UFO and MUFON. So I got to know researchers around the world. And in 2015, a colleague of mine in Poland, Peter Cielebius, Peter sent me a manuscript he'd written, a UFO book. Not necessarily to be published, he was practicing his English writing. He speaks English very good. He wanted me to read it. So I did. And I thought, this will make a really good book. So a friend of mine called John Hanson, John is a former police detective. He runs his own publishing company called Haunted Skies. He persuaded me to go ahead and publish it, and he encouraged me and he showed me how to do it. So in 2015, I published UFOs over Poland. The reason for doing it, Maria, was the idea that I had and still have today was to publish UFO material that wasn't necessarily available in English. So I followed that up with the first book by Dr. Dan Farkas, and this was called UFOs over Romania. And I've since published books from my colleague Roberto Pinotti in Italy, Tiago Tichetti in Brazil, as well as from UFO researchers in the UK and the US. So I try and find things that are perhaps not so well known, and but nonetheless I believe they should be published.
Are you going to write and publish a new book soon?
For me, yes. I mean, during this second lockdown in 2020, the second lockdown, I wrote two books. The first one is called Introducing UFOs, A Young Person's Guide. It is illustrated by a colleague of mine called Ronald Kinsella. That is aimed at a teenage audience. You know, the next generation of UFO researchers. Also in 2020, which I'll be publishing later this year in 2021, I wrote a book called UFO Landings UK. Okay. And there's a whole raft of things in there that you'll probably never have seen before. One of the reasons why I haven't got a publishing date for it yet is that we've started to make a documentary based on the book. That was delayed slightly last year because of the pandemic. We have filmed half of it, so the other half is still yet to be filmed, and then we'll look for a release date. So the idea will be to release the documentary and the book at the same time.
Well, that is tremendously cool that we can also read and watch you via TV. Philip, and I must say there are so many unanswered questions around the topic UFOs, where they come from, what they are, who is operating them, why don't we see them all the time? But unfortunately, I see that the hour is already past. And for that, I'd like to thank you for having the opportunity to talk with you about this fascinating topic. But before we close out, can you tell us where we can find more information about your research, your training courses, your books, and perhaps for people to contact you when they have questions for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just go to the website, www.flyingdiscpress.com, disc is spelt with a K, so that's flyingdiscpress.com. You know, that's a blog. My contact details are on there. You can send me an email. I'm also on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, under Philip Mantle and Flying Dispress. So I'm easy to find, Maria. I've been around a long time.
Thank you all for tuning in this week on The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. Make sure to visit our website, www.nexttruth.com. That is nexttruth, all in one word.com. And let us know what you think about our podcast. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section The Next Truth Podcasts. Or if you would simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us too. I am Maria Anna van Driel with The Next Truth. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.